Have you ever wondered why kids around the world grow up eating things like sushi, falafel, curry, and so many of our American children seem to be uncomfortable eating anything other than chicken nuggets or mac and cheese? Are we missing something? What can we do to help them expand their palates so that they can get the variety and the nutrients they need to grow and develop, all those nutrients that we as parents worry about? I grew up in Russia, and when I was a child, I ate things that my family ate. We had borscht and herring and buckwheat. Might sound strange, but I actually liked it all. So when my daughter was born here in America, of course I wanted her to learn to eat well. But I also knew from my own experience that she was capable of eating far more than broccoli with cheese or chicken nuggets. So I started doing some research, and I found a lot of interesting information that surprised me. Perhaps we've been focusing on the wrong thing. We've been focusing on what we feed our kids. Maybe we need to focus on how. I contend that eating is a lifelong skill, and we need to teach our children how to eat. Take toilet training, for example. When we do it with our children, we take a couple of weekends, we put in a lot of effort, and we make sure they succeed. Teaching our kids to eat will also involve time and effort, but it will take more than a couple of weekends because eating is far more complex than toilet training. Eating is the one thing that we as human beings do that requires us to use all of our sensory systems. It is also one of only 2 human behaviors that has to simultaneously integrate multiple pieces of information across all of these systems. And if you're curious, the other behavior is sex, by the way. For this integration to occur, hundreds of thousands of brain pathways need to fire, and a child needs to develop each and every one of them. Plus, when we eat, it takes us nearly 30 muscles, 6 cranial nerves, and almost every internal organ. As it turns out, eating is quite complex. But when a child learns to eat, they are able to develop a healthy relationship with food, which will ultimately give them the healthy mind and the healthy body we all want for them. So how do we teach our kids to eat? There are 3 key aspects to teaching them this skill. First, trust them with their food choices. When we trust our kids with what they choose to eat, we're teaching them to listen to their bodies, and that's where that healthy relationship with food begins. Think about this. When a baby is born, and if they nurse, they get to eat on demand. They eat as much as they want, as often as they want. And their mother trusts them with that. When that baby gets a little older, that trust very often gets broken. And we find ourselves pressuring our kids to eat. Have another bite. You can't have this until you finish that. Have some chicken, you need the protein. When we pressure a child to eat, we interfere with their ability to figure out how much and what to eat to get that perfect nourishment. Remember the baby that was eating on demand and getting what he needed? Not only that, but when we pressure a child to eat, we're not teaching them anything about making healthy food choices later in life. How many of us still don't care about foods that we were pressured to eat when we were children? That notion that a child is born with this internal ability, this intuition to know what and how much to eat, goes back to 1928. A study was published in the American Journal of Diseases in Children. A group of weaned-off infants were offered a buffet of 33 whole foods to eat from over a period of 6 to 12 months. And there was only one rule. adults were not allowed to even give a hint to these kids about what to choose and how much to eat. And the results were fascinating. Even though each child ate something different, and even though there were no patterns among them, each one emerged with a perfect bill of health and a perfect nutritional status. This approach removes the pressure from a child to eat and gives them an opportunity to choose from a very specific range of foods. And in a home, it may look like a meal served family style, where a parent is responsible for the menu, is responsible for the timing and for the place of the meal. This approach is also known as the division of responsibility in feeding, and it was pioneered by a registered dietitian and feeding expert, Ellen Satter. When we remove the pressure from a child to eat, we're then able to let them learn to listen to their body. They might come to the table, look at the food, and say, well, what looks good to me right now? What do I feel like eating? Just like we do. In other words, what nutrients does my body need? Should I have 1 or 2 servings of potatoes? How hungry am I? Should I have another serving? How does my tummy feel? Is it full? Do I need something else? And as they go through this process of tuning into that internal ability of knowing, of hearing their body's hunger and fullness cues, we need to resist the temptation to interfere. It is so important that we are mindful about focusing so much on the what, on that last piece of broccoli that they haven't eaten, and instead focusing our attention on helping kids develop healthy eating habits for the long run. Teaching our kids to eat means teaching them to listen to their body, and that requires that we trust them with their food choices. Second key aspect to teaching our kids how to eat is exposing them repeatedly to all kinds of different foods, even if they've rejected them before. Learning to eat all kinds of different foods requires that repeated exposure because eating is such a sensory experience. Remember those hundreds of thousands of brain pathways, cranial nerves, muscles, and all of our sensory systems that help us experience eating the way it was designed to be experienced? To help you understand this a little bit better from a child's perspective, take a look at this picture. Imagine you were served this for lunch. Would you hesitate a little? When a child is born, the world of food is entirely new to them. All food looks like this to them. They literally need to go through every single sensory experience, looking, smelling, touching, licking, and so forth, to become comfortable around a new food. And they will need dozens of times of repeated exposure to dare to eat it. Now, this process will involve some wasted effort and wasted food. But just like with any learning experience, there will be some casualties. Think of toilet training. There will be accidents. When my daughter was 2, she used to love eating avocados. She couldn't get enough of them. And then one day she decided she didn't like them anymore. It is common for kids to go through something that's called sensory-specific satiety. And it happens when a child gets tired of even their favorite food, and then they move on to the next and to the next, trying to get those nutrients that they need to maintain a nutritionally adequate diet. My job as a parent was to concentrate on the how. Keep putting that avocado in front of her, even when she didn't touch it, without any pressure. And eventually, she was ready to eat it again. Another example would be a child who is experiencing food jagging, or getting stuck eating the same food prepared exactly the same way over and over again. For example, mac and cheese, Kraft brand, bows not ties, yellow cheese not white cheese. A child food jags when they transition from one cognitive development stage to the next. And during that time, their sensory mechanism regresses. And so they want to eat the same food prepared exactly the same way because it's the same texture and the same taste, so they don't have to use their sensory brain. It's an easy way out for them. And they will take it unless a parent steps in, because during those times, it is quite common for a child to develop unhealthy eating habits. So a parent's job, again, is to be responsible for the menu and keep putting all kinds of different foods in front of that child, potentially throwing the mac and cheese into the mix every couple of days or so. When we are raising a small child, we're barely keeping our heads above water. But what gives me peace of mind is knowing that unless a child is born with an underlying medical condition, our kids are able to eat all kinds of things. When my daughter was a toddler, I did give her some herring and maybe borscht. And it took a few times, but now she likes these things. What's interesting is that we know that children are born with a predisposition to love those fatty, sweet, salty tastes. But multiple research studies show that a child will learn to like those foods to which they have been exposed the most. So learning to eat all kinds of different things will require repeated exposure. So don't give up. Keep putting those foods in front of them, even if they haven't liked something in the past. The third key aspect to teaching your child how to eat is your presence with them during meal times. Studies show that a child will much more likely try a new food when a trusted adult is eating that same type of food. Think of any other learning experience when you're present with your children, learning to ride a bike or reassuring them during their first airplane ride. We need to be there to model and to encourage them to explore food and to learn to eat. When I was a child, my mom used to tell me stories about whatever it was she was feeding me, and it was so much fun. And now looking back at it, I realize just how important that simple interaction may have been. She was showing me how to build those positive associations with eating, but also she was teaching me that eating was designed to be a shared experience. I realize that in our day and age, it is tough to be present with our kids. Sometimes the only place where we can feed them is the car. Or we turn to entertainment to distract our toddler so they would take some food. Or we turn to distractions ourselves because meal times have become so stressful as a result of our focus on what and how much our kids eat. But there is a physiological reason why our positive presence is so important. Negativity or pressuring our kids to eat may affect their appetite and digestion because it might create anxiety in a child. Watching TV or any other kind of screen distorts their sensory mechanism, causing food to taste differently. Sweet doesn't taste as sweet anymore, salty not as salty, potentially causing a child to overeat. But if you have a chance to sit down and share a meal at the table with your kiddo, be intentional about doing that. And if not, if you're in the car, just grab a moment, turn around and share something small that you brought for yourself with your child. There's no need to feel guilty. Or tell a fun story about those meatballs that you're trying to feed your toddler. That will go a long way. Being present with your child is something so simple, but it's one of the most emboldening and encouraging gifts that we can give to them. Sharing a meal with them wherever you can, is literally how they will learn to eat. Here in America, we are fortunate to have access to all kinds of foods from all over the world. What an opportunity to expand our children's palates. The tools that I've shared with you will help, but they will only go so far unless we intentionally choose to open up the world of food to our children. Over the years, it seems that we've come to accept the notion that our children are picky eaters, that they need kid-friendly foods, they need kids' menus. But what if food was just food? Not kids' food and adult food. By design, it is. When we call our children picky eaters, and we do it internally, we do it out loud, we do it implicitly when we cater and make special meals for them, we're perpetuating a fallacy and reinforcing that message to them. But when we recognize what our children's abilities to eat actually are, when we see that all they need is for us to trust them, to offer them opportunities to try, and to be there with them, I believe the world of food will open up to them. And when it does, they're much more likely to become the great eaters we all want them to be. Thank you.